Now let's turn to looking at monopoly decision making for profit maximizing monopoly. Now the first point that I want to draw out is that monopoly demand and marginal revenue from monopoly are different. This distinguishes them from a price taker, where really they have as much demand as they'd like as long as they sell at the going price, which makes that price their marginal revenue. That stops being true for monopoly. Another important point to remember is that monopolies are bound by demand for their product. In fact, in a sense, they're more bound by demand for a product than perfect competitors are. This is just because we assume that perfect competitors or price takers are so small relative to their entire market, they don't have to worry about going out and finding people to buy the product. That being the case, it's only as long as they charge the same price as everyone else. So what they're bound on is the price they can charge. But as long as they charge that price, they can sell as much of the product as they want, practically speaking. For monopoly, that's not true. For monopoly, they really have to think about the fact that the higher the price is, the less of the product people want to buy. And because the monopoly controls the entire market, they're the ones that experience that. Right? So if I increase the price as a monopoly, I end up losing customers. If I want to get more customers, I have to decrease the price to make my good more affordable or more attractive to potential consumers. Now the good news when we look at monopoly decision making is that the same output rule that we use for price takers applies here. That is, we choose the quantity where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Where things get tricky is that marginal revenue is no longer equal to the price, and that the price choice is something that now a monopoly has to think about. For a price taker, they just have to match the price that's going in the market. For a monopoly, they get to choose the price, and there is a decision that has to be made regarding that. Right. Now the bad news, which is what makes things more complicated, is that it's this downward sloping demand. That is the fact that for me to convince more people to buy the thing, I have to lower the price. That actually creates an incentive for me to restrict production to push prices up a little bit above what they might be in a more competitive market. Now let's work through an example. In this example, I have the table here, price and quantity. Those come from the demand curve. Then we have the total fixed cost, total variable cost, total revenue, marginal cost, and marginal revenue. Now go ahead, if you can pause the video, you can try to fill this in. I do have a hint for the next slide just to get you started. So here's that hint I was talking about if you need it. So for the first line, we note that our total fixed cost is 5. If it's $5 when we produce 1, it's going to be $5 when we produce 2 because fixed costs are fixed. Total cost we always get by adding up our fixed cost and variable cost. So in the first line it would be 5 plus 0, and the second line would be 5 plus 1. Total revenue is always price times quantity. In that first line, price of 5, quantity of 1, multiply, we get 5. In the second line, price of 4, quantity of 2, multiply, we get 8. Marginal cost, we remember, is the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity. So here, between the first and second line, cost changed by $1, while quantity changed by 1. $1 divided by 1 is still 1. Marginal revenue, remember, is the change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity. Total revenue changes from 5 to 8, that's a change of 3. Divide that by the change in quantity was 1. 3 divided by 1 is 3. Now go ahead and fill in the rest. Here in a slide, we'll look at the answer. And here's the answer we should have come up with. Now when we look at it, remember we're looking for the point where marginal cost and marginal revenue cross. Now here we don't see where they're actually equal to each other, but we can figure out where they'll end up being equal to each other. And that's somewhere between that first line of marginal cost and marginal revenue and the second one. So that means we should choose to produce a quantity of 2 charging a price of 4. Now the reason we know that is that we can see the value of marginal cost in that first line is 1, marginal revenue is 3. Right, so marginal revenue is higher. We go to the next line, marginal revenue is now lower than marginal cost. They must have crossed somewhere there in between. Now, if we look at this, we can verify that this is actually the profit maximizing quantity just by looking at our profits. The first line, 5 minus 5 will be 0. Second line, 8 minus 6 will be 2. Next line, 9 minus 9 will be 0. So it looks like we're pretty good. That $2 profit that we're earning is as good as it's going to get. Graphically, it looks something like this. We have the demand curve lying there, being the red line, marginal revenue curve lying under it, marginal cost curve sloping upward. We look for where marginal revenue and marginal cost cross. That gives us our quantity. Then to get our price, we don't look at where marginal revenue and marginal cost cross. Instead, we look up at the demand curve. After all, I want to charge as much as I possibly can as long as I sell that quantity. The demand curve tells me the price that I can charge and still sell that quantity. An important point here is about demand versus marginal revenue. The marginal revenue here is less than the price, which is different from the price taker. So why did that happen? Well, for the monopoly to sell more, for it to increase its quantity, it has to decrease its price. As a result, marginal revenue will then show a quantity effect and a price effect. Right? On the one hand, we're selling more. That greater quantity would tend to help our revenues. Right? So marginal revenue should be higher the more we sell. Right? Except at the same time, for us to sell more, we have to lower the price, and that hurts our marginal revenue. So it ends up, because I am selling more but at a lower price, my marginal revenue is actually below the price. Here's another example. You can go through and fill this out. I'll be with you in a few seconds. The only thing that I've changed, just so you know, is that now our total fixed cost, instead of being $5, it's $7.50, and that's going to create some changes, but I'm sure you can figure that out. I'll see you in a few seconds. And here's the answer we should have come up with. Now, the big thing we notice is marginal cost and marginal revenue are exactly the same as in our previous example, which means we should make exactly the same choice of charging $4 and producing 2 units. Now, the important point that I want to pull out here is that this monopoly isn't profitable. It has a revenue of $8 and a cost of $8.50. So it means it's losing 50 cents every single period. That being the case, we wouldn't expect this monopoly to really stay in business very long. And that's really an important point once we start thinking about it, isn't it? We don't actually have a guarantee of having a profit. Monopolies, now we know that monopolies can restrict their production some to prop up prices, and to do this if it happens to help profits. But at the same time, it doesn't guarantee you can actually make a profit. It might be, maybe your demand is just so low that you can't make a profit at all. Maybe nobody just wants the product you're producing, or maybe the cost is just astronomical. Right? So we could imagine, say, something like a glass sword or a lead baseball, these things that are totally useless. Nobody's going to want to buy it. Because demand is so small, it doesn't matter if you're the only one producing it and can put whatever price tag you'd like on it. You're not going to be profitable. At the same time, we can imagine something for which there might be some kind of demand, but where the cost would just be astronomical. We could imagine somebody, say, trying to make a belt out of uranium or something like that. This would probably not be very good for your health, but I could imagine people buying this, maybe if they're involved with nuclear power or something. But in that case, we would expect the cost to be astronomical because uranium is very expensive. Right? As a result, we still wouldn't expect, even if you're a monopoly, for you to be able to make a profit in that case. So being a monopoly, it helps you become more able to make a profit, but it doesn't guarantee you'll actually end up profitable. Now, on the other hand, when we look out in reality, we tend to actually see profitable monopolies. Now, the reason for that is that the monopolies we see are those that have survived. And monopolies will only survive if they are actually profitable. As we said before, a monopoly that's not profitable is going to shut down, is going to exit, is going to leave business. So those monopolies that we actually observe in reality will tend to be profitable. But it's not that they're profitable because they're monopolies. It's rather that they are still surviving monopolies that we can observe because they were profitable. Now, certainly being a monopoly helps them to make a profit, but it's the profit that allows them to survive.